The slap cracked across the elegant restaurant so loudly that every conversation stopped at once. A wineglass trembled on a nearby table, a waiter froze halfway across the room, and dozens of eyes turned toward the young waitress whose cheek had instantly turned red. She stood there in stunned silence, one hand pressed against her face, while the billionaire's fiancé remained rigid in front of her, breathing heavily with anger. But the woman in the red vest was not the waitress who had caused the misunderstanding. She was the wrong waitress, and within minutes, the entire restaurant would discover just how costly one moment of arrogance could become. If you believe kindness matters more than money, and that everyone deserves a second chance regardless of their position in life, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Because sometimes the person treated as invisible is the very person who changes everything. It was a bright Saturday afternoon at the luxurious Belmont Grand, where sunlight poured through enormous windows and turned the polished marble floors golden. Wealthy guests sat beneath crystal chandeliers, enjoying expensive lunches while quiet music played in the background. At the center of the restaurant sat Everett Vale, a young billionaire whose name appeared regularly in business magazines. Across from him was his fiancée, Celeste Marlowe, a woman known for her flawless appearance, expensive clothes, and sharp temper. Their engagement had become the talk of the city, and that afternoon they were celebrating a major business deal with several important guests. Among the staff moving silently between the tables was Mara Venn, a 24-year-old waitress who had been working at the hotel for only 6 months. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her dark hair neatly tied back, and despite the exhaustion in her eyes, she treated every guest with patience. She had learned long ago that a smile could sometimes be the only kindness a tired person received all day. Mara was supporting her younger brother after their mother became unable to work, and every tip mattered. Losing this job was not something she could afford. Earlier that afternoon, another waitress had accidentally spilled a small amount of sparkling water near Celeste's table. Celeste immediately became furious. She demanded that the manager remove the employee and insisted that someone else serve her personally. The manager apologized repeatedly, but in the confusion, another server approached the table carrying a fresh tray. Her name tag read Mara. Celeste, already angry and embarrassed in front of her wealthy companions, assumed Mara was the same woman who had made the mistake. Mara had barely placed the tray down when Celeste accused her of ruining the celebration. Mara tried to explain that she had not been involved, but the accusation only became louder. Then came the slap. The restaurant fell silent. Mara's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to cry. She had experienced hardship before, yet being humiliated in front of a room full of strangers cut deeper than she expected. She slowly lowered her hand from her cheek and looked at Celeste, not with anger, but with a quiet sadness that made several guests uncomfortable. Everett stood up immediately. His face had changed completely. He looked from Mara to Celeste and then toward the manager. For the first time that afternoon, everyone saw something that Celeste had failed to notice. Everett recognized Mara. Several years earlier, before he became a billionaire, Everett had been a struggling college student. One winter morning, he had entered a small neighborhood cafe with only enough money for a cup of coffee. His card had been declined. Embarrassed, he had walked away from the counter, but a young employee had quietly paid for his coffee and left a handwritten note beside the cup telling him that difficult days did not last forever. Everett had kept that note for years. Now, standing in the Belmont Grand, he realized that the woman in front of him was the same person. Mara had not recognized him. She had forgotten the young man from the cafe because, to her, helping someone had never been a business transaction worth remembering. Everett walked toward her and asked the manager to bring the restaurant's security footage. The recording showed everything clearly. Mara had never spilled the water. She had not even been near Celeste's table when the accident happened. She had simply been the person who arrived afterward. The truth spread through the restaurant like a shockwave. Celeste's confidence disappeared. Her face became pale as she realized what she had done. She had publicly humiliated an innocent woman, and worse, she had done it while believing money gave her the right. But Everett did something nobody expected. He did not shout at Celeste. Instead, he turned toward Mara and apologized on behalf of everyone who had stood silently while she was mistreated. Then he told the manager that Mara's job would never be threatened because of what had happened. Mara quietly thanked him, but Everett was not finished. He remembered the old cafe, the coffee she had paid for, and the note she had written. He told her that during the hardest period of his life, her small act of kindness had stayed with him. It had reminded him that success was meaningless if a person forgot how to treat others. Mara finally understood who he was. Celeste tried to apologize, but Mara did something that shocked everyone even more. She accepted the apology. Not because the slap was acceptable, and not because Celeste deserved forgiveness without consequences, but because Mara knew what it meant to carry anger until it became heavier than the pain that caused it. Everett then made a decision that changed Mara's life. He offered her a position with one of his charitable foundations, where she could continue helping people while receiving a salary that would allow her to care for her family without working endless shifts. Mara initially hesitated, afraid the offer was simply pity. Everett assured her that it was not charity. It was recognition. That evening, Celeste left the restaurant alone. The engagement would eventually end, but the lesson stayed with her. For the first time, she understood that wealth could open doors, but it could never purchase dignity. Months later, Mara visited the same little cafe where she had once bought coffee for a struggling stranger. She sat by the window and watched people passing outside. Her life had changed completely, yet she still carried the same worn purse and the same habit of helping others whenever she could. On the table beside her was a framed copy of the note she had written years before. The words were simple, but they had traveled farther than she ever imagined. Difficult days do not last forever. Mara had never known that a small act of kindness could return years later and change her destiny. She had never expected a billionaire to remember her. And she certainly never imagined that being mistaken for someone else would become the moment that exposed the true character of everyone in the room. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Sometimes the smallest good deed becomes a light in someone else's darkest hour. And before you leave, make a special commitment today. Promise yourself that you will never judge someone's worth by their clothes, their job, their bank account, or their social position. Treat the person serving your meal with the same respect you would give the person sitting at the most expensive table. Because you never know whose life you might be changing with one simple act of kindness. Would you prefer the next story to be more dramatic or more emotional?